Hari. Welcome to the Agile Coach podcast. Thank you for coming out. Let's just start by just having you share a little bit about your background so people get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, thanks, Pavitra, for having me here. I'm super excited to be here on this podcast. A little bit of background about me. I traditionally actually didn't start with an Agile background. I was in sales. And so when I was first introduced to Agile and this concept, it was really interesting to me, and that's when I started learning more about it. And now, having the experience of working with multiple different companies as a Scrum Master and an Agile coach, I just love the aspect of business and IT coming together to solve the problems they have.
Right.
I think that was a big aspect I was missing before. And companies are still trying to figure it out, and I love being part of that journey with them. So.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's awesome. So for today, I really want to pick your brain on Scaled Agile Framework because I know you've worked with a couple of companies that really have taken the Scaled Agile, and I really like how you're always able to simplify it because it's a very dense topic. There's a lot going on within Scaled Agile Framework. So how would you really simplify, just really simplifying what is the SAFe framework really?
Yeah, to me, or at least my experience with SAFe has been, typically, when you have a big company that has multiple different projects and multiple different teams, what do you really want in those teams, right? You want that transparency across from the bottom to top to leadership. And I think that's what SAFe really allows, because you're not functioning at an individual level. You're not having individual Scrum teams, going in different directions.
Yeah.
You're really having a team, giving them a vision and having them focus on the same thing.
Right.
So to me, when you talk about SAFe, the simple term is you're scaling Agile across a big organization.
Yes.
When you have multiple software development teams, how do you get them moving in the same direction? And I think that's when companies start looking at SAFe and adopting SAFe.
Right. Yeah, from my experience, it's just really been, there's so many complexities when it comes to building product or really getting people together.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've seen that SAFe really does a good job, it gives you a framework. It says, here you go. And, here you go. Here's how you do it. Here are some of the roles. Here's how you implement it. And this really give you a big bang, here you go, here's how you implement it.
Not only at a team level, they're not just giving you the Scrum and Agile practices, but they give you organization level. How do you take business requirement or business problems and actually take them, a thesis through the process, the pipeline, to get it to a development team.
Right.
So it really gives that structure, not just at a team level, but when you have these program and large solution levels, it really allows leadership to create alignment within these smaller teams. And then I think that's really powerful because when you have teams pointing in the same direction, you're able to deliver a lot more value.
Right. And that's what SAFe is really structured around, right? Like building quality, transparency. There's a few other competencies that they're really built on. And what I've seen is it really does help organizations to kind of come together and, okay, here's the work for next 8 to 12 weeks. Everybody knows it. Everybody's committed to it. It provides transparency. People can, have frequent sync-ins or check-ins, just really know where are they, what are they delivering. It does really bring both business and IT together, like you said. So my next question for you is, how is the role of a Scrum Master really different in SAFe versus just being in a regular, Scrum team?
Good question. Yeah. From my experience, I think when you're in a scaled agile environment, you're really working with not just one team but other teams.
Right.
And there's a lot of dependencies that come with that. Whether you're in an organization where you still have component-based teams and you're very dependent on team B, team C for them to get their work done before you can get your work done. Right. You're interacting with the other Scrum Masters.
Right.
You might be interacting with leadership a lot more.
Yeah.
So I would say you really, being able to build relationships with these different outside team members is going to be very, very important because to manage distractions as well as make sure that you can manage those interdependencies that happen within teams.
Right. And the big part, I'm sure you'll talk about it, but really a Scrum Master's role, obviously there's the day-to-day But really, during PI planning, a Scrum Master's role is a bit different than like a traditional Scrum Master role, where maybe in a day-to-day you are facilitating different ceremonies and helping the teams remove impediments. But when there is that 2-day PI planning, maybe talk a little bit about. We're going to talk about what PI planning really is in a little bit, but what have you seen or what have you done to be really effective Scrum Master during those 2 days or 3 days of the PI planning?
Yeah, I think you have a lot of pre-planning. When you're in an individual Scrum team, you may have things and dependencies outside, but you're kind of just focused inside the bubble of the team.
Right.
Versus when you're in a scaled agile environment, like you mentioned, where you're in that PI event, there's a lot of work that maybe you're prepping for those days events, making sure the right tools are there, making sure maybe features are more prepared, right? Which you might not do at a team level. Right. You might be just focused on the stories. So you're really going outside of that comfort of a team and really becoming a barrier and kind of a glue between the team level and the rest of the organization. And so coming into PI planning, what I've had to do is I have to make sure that, hey, if there's dependencies, I'm having these discussions ahead, right? Trying to forecast them better. Yeah. Because that's ultimately, if you can forecast some of these things and plan them out better, it saves a lot of money.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've maybe seen or faced in a safe organization, because when a company decides to go safe or implement safe, I mean, it's a big deal. Yeah. So what are some things that you've seen?
Yeah, so I actually seen a variety of things, from companies that were implementing safe right from the beginning, and I was there part of that process. Right. And I've been in companies where they took some concepts from safe, but they've kind of adopted to their own, making tweaks. So the biggest thing I see is who has the buy-in for the transformation is the biggest key. Is there a transformation coming from IT? Is there a transformation coming from business, or both? Because that will determine, what type of funding, how big is the transformation happening? Like, is it one train, a solution train at a time, or is it multiple trains, like a whole portfolio doing transforming? So I'll kind of give an example of some of these experiences I had. The most successful experience I've had is when organizations get it one slice at a time, and which is what SAFE recommends as well. And, when you do that and you're able to bring in these outside coaches and really make sure that the leaders, the safe leaders within the organizations are well knowledgeable. Right. The Scrum Masters, product owners, Agile coaches, RT, make sure they have all the tools necessity and they are backed up by the Agile coach to really, drive that transformation. So in those organizations where I feel like they do it more by the book, I have tend to see a lot more success. Right. Versus organization that maybe don't have a business buy-in. They want to do these safe things and concept, but it's almost like they can't because they still have business doesn't understand, what IT is doing. Right. So it's only approved up to the program level, or it's only approved even up to a certain level, but they still have all these restrictions, and that's another challenge I see. Right. The good challenge I've seen in organization is when the leaders in the organization are not trained well, meaning that maybe you bring in an Agile coach, gave you a 2-day training for the team if they're lucky. Yeah. Maybe a training for the Scrum Masters and maybe a training for the leaders, right? Whoever is able to attend their busy schedule. Yeah. And a lot of these managers, they don't end up becoming, they don't end up leaving their, they're still very directive. They're still used to telling teams what to do. Command and control, exactly. Right. And if there hasn't been a coach that's really able to come in and help them with that, help transform that mindset within the organization, Scrum Masters are going to have a really hard time because you have a manager who's been there 5-10 years and is in a leadership position. Right. And you as a Scrum Master, maybe you're in a contract position where you're just coming into the company. So it can be really hard to make those coaching transformation. And it can actually be a hindrance to transforming safe. Right. So.
Yeah, no, the biggest thing I've also seen really is not training people. I've been in an organization where somehow the business actually got on board. Yeah. Everybody got trained in the business. So they're like, okay, we got trained in safe, we're going safe.
while the IT folks were just really trained, just a 2-day training, just on Scrum and Agile a little bit.
Yep.
And so they try to do the transformation, just having business be trained, but not IT. And I remember going into the organization and they had no clue what the heck was happening. And the leadership wasn't on board. They didn't have a buy-in. They were trying because obviously, they want to look good in front of business. And so they were trying to go along with it. But because they weren't trained, they weren't able to really let go of that command and control that you talked about. And, it didn't end up becoming successful because that very, very same challenge, right? And I think a lot of times, there has to be that top and bottom, it's not
transformation.
just, and so when leadership is not trained, when the team is not trained, then it becomes really hard. There's no culture whatsoever.
And not just the culture aspect, people don't get a chance to, maybe if there's no business buy-in, business is wondering why initially maybe the teams are not as quick because, they're not as mature, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the organization has, even companies sometimes struggle with the concept of innovation and planning sprint.
Right.
So I've seen a company that I've worked for, they actually, had, PI planning, they had all these other concepts, but they didn't have that innovation and planning. And you never have continued learning or the space for the teams to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what happens, like you mentioned, when people are not on the same page from business, IT, all across, and you're not having that continued training to bring them to the same page. It's going to create this disparity, and, you're never going to be on the same page because maybe they want delivery right away and they don't understand that it might take these teams a little bit time before they can speed up and deliver the value that the company may want.
Yeah, just because you go through a transformation, it doesn't fix your problems.
Yes,
right?
it just highlights them.
It just highlights them, and there has to be a lot of training and more of a culture. The team needs to be. They need to feel like they're valued, and there's that obviously whole bucket that we don't have to kind of go into, but there's a lot of that. Transformations are not necessarily easy.
So next question that I wanted to really pick your brain on is, what are some really good attributes of a Scrum Master, specifically in a safe environment? Maybe somebody is out there listening to this podcast right now and they are going to be a Scrum Master in a safe organization or some organization that are just starting a safe transformation. What are some tips or just really good attributes that you have recommendation for somebody going into the organization?
Yeah, I think the first thing, biggest thing is when you're in a Scaled Agile environment, you have to be proactive around, the different events you have. So from PI planning to, your weekly sync up, scrums with leadership, just being proactive and making sure that you come into those prepared.
Yeah.
Because if you come into those prepared, then you're going to be able to, create visibility between what's happening at a team level and leadership level, which is very, very important. When you have those weekly sync up for scrums, if, you're having challenges within the team or there's certain dependencies, if you can work closely with your RTE and really create visibility into some of the challenges that you're running into, then you really, because the RTE is supposed to be a coach that you can go with if you have trouble. So knowing that you're going to have to deal with it all on your own and you do have help. So first thing is raising visibility. Second thing is proactively building relationships with other teams, Scrum Masters, or product owners.
Yeah.
So I'll actually give you an example. I started at an safe organization during the remote time.
Yeah.
And so I've never met the other Scrum Masters, and I could just, waited, hey, in these meetings, I'll get to know them when I can.
Yeah.
But instead, what I chose to do is I set up a 30-minute call with them.
Yeah.
And I actually, maybe they weren't comfortable turning on their video, but I proactively turn on the video, so it gives them an opportunity to get to know me. But then I can also get to know them. So I actually got to know them a little bit.
Yeah.
And that was the first initial step that I took to build that relationship. So I think proactiveness for us guys is important, because if you have these relationships with other Scrum Masters and product owners, then you can work with them to make sure that, hey, you're being proactive for the requirements.
Right.
Then you can make sure that if there's a dependency or you need help, you can just reach out and get a faster response versus waiting.
Right.
I would say besides that, some other characteristic is I think if you are just open to learning from other Scrum Masters. So a lot of times when you're in a Scaled Agile organization, you're going to have community of practices, right? Some sort of Agile community of practice that you're going to get a chance to grow. And so if you can really be open, you're not really just learning from your team, but you're able to learn from the other teams and the other Scrum Masters and the challenges they're running into. So I think that eagerness and that openness to know that, hey, how can I get better? If you have that, then that's going to help you growing a Scaled Agile organization.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think you hit it home. I think the biggest thing when somebody is an Agilist or really a Scrum Master, when you are trying to implement change or bring change into an organization, you really have to know yourself. You have to be able to master yourself. You have to go through the transformation. You have to be good at listening. You have to be good at, letting other people talk in the organization, really hearing the teams. And there's so much to be learned from other people collectively. So I think you hit it home. You did a great job there. The next thing I wanted to kind of go more into is PI planning. Let's talk about PI planning because, I mean, it's really the highlight when you really think about safe organizations. So maybe what is PI planning and just really what happens during that day? We don't have, obviously we could talk just about PI planning for a very long time.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, it is. I just like in a high level, what is PI planning? And just what happens, just like high level.
So PI planning is this 2-day event that happens, where pretty much everyone in the project, whether that's in the the solution training or portfolio, they come together, business and IT. Maybe during non-COVID times, if they're across the U.S. or even across different countries, you want to ideally try to get in the same room face to face. And basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create alignment to the vision that maybe the business has of what they want to accomplish maybe over the next 3 months, right? So in an ideal, PI planning, you have 10 to 12 weeks that you're really planning for. So it allows you to get a high level plan together, and it allows you to have these conversations ahead of time. And so PI planning starts with, business kind of giving their vision, beginning of day one when everyone's in the same room. And, they bring in the features they would like to work in. Ideally, their top 10 features. And, RT or UX may present solutions or approaches for these features. And ideally, what happens after that is the teams go into what's called a breakout. And they break out into these individual teams and they break down the features into what they're going to do for the next 4 sprints. And they plan the work at a high level. And, coming out of the end of day 2, ideally, what you're having these dependencies mapped out, which is very, very huge, right? You're getting all these different teams in the same place. It's a very powerful concept because let's say I have a dependency with team C. I can go and talk to them and say, hey, I need this by this time. And we can have an alignment. We can have a communication. We can highlight it to leadership so everyone knows what's coming. So it's just a lot better ways to prepare. And I think why big organizations love PI planning is it allows them to align, right? How do companies plan their things? Yearly, right? Then quarterly, then trimester, right? So it really allows them to align to that with PI planning. So,
No, I think a few key points that you really hit in there is alignment. Because, you can't really go through a transformation without alignment, one thing. Another thing is, in that room, everybody, you should not leave PI planning without your questions being answered, certain risk, whatever risk there are, those being mitigated or accepted, somebody owns some of those risks, right? Walking out of the room, after that 2-day, everybody knows what they're doing going back, and all the questions are being answered because, ideally everybody should be present there from business, IT, architecture, whoever really needs to answer any questions in there, they're there. That's the biggest thing that you talked about there. And then another thing is the dependencies are mapped out. There is a huge board on what features getting delivered from what team and what dependencies are there from each of those teams. If team B is dependent on team A, what dependency is it? When will that get resolved? So there's a lot of communication happening.
Yeah.
Right.
And that communication is really hard to do if, like you said, if people are, they're not in the same location.
Yeah.
Or, if team A planned today and team B planned tomorrow, right? So there's just a powerful concept they're doing at the same time. And I think, right now it's kind of interesting because organizations are really having to learn how to do that virtually. So.
Yeah. I'm sure it's tough.
Yeah.
I guess maybe we can talk a little bit about it just virtually because you've run some PI plannings virtually as well. Because I don't know how we will still be virtually for some time, I'm sure. And I mean, a lot of organizations after COVID are really going into like being more virtual as well, just remote anyway. So, I mean, what are some things that, you have done as a Scrum Master or just really the organization that you are in currently have done to make the PI planning still effective in a sense? Because I know it's hard when you're not face to face, when you can't just go grab that person. So what have you done?
Yeah, so the organization that I'm currently working on, we've gone through multiple PI plannings virtually, and some of the things that we've had to do is, first one is, I think, coming back to the proactiveness portion. I think a lot of work has to be done before PI planning. Now, because it's hard to jump from maybe a meeting room to a meeting room or get a solution person and say, what do you think of this? You have to, I think, have a look at the features or the epics a little bit beforehand. And just, that helps a long way. So if as a Scrum Master, you can set up, some sort of refinement meeting, or if you can work with your product owner or your product manager to make sure that you're aware of the features that you're going to be working on and at least have some initial conversation, it's going to make it a lot easier. So besides that, setting up a dependency meeting, review meeting, separately. So obviously, you'll have, at the end of the second day, you'll present all of the dependencies and make sure there's alignment, right? From the program board. But before that, for us at least, we end up having a lot of dependencies with the DevOps team, right? So, I set up a meeting way beforehand for the next 2 days. We can't be in the same room, but I can set up a meeting saying, okay, 1:30, before, we present, I want to get together with your team, just go through these dependencies, see if you have any questions, see,
Do you do that during PI planning or even?
We do that in PI planning because we don't know we have some ideas of the dependencies. So I send the invite before PI planning. I send the invite before PI planning, but we have the meeting during the PI planning. Other than that, just incorporating breaks and some sort of like activity to make it fun. So I know some teams have done trivias. I usually try to at least do some sort of game or icebreakers because people are just there all day and sometimes it can get tough. The last thing me and my product owner try to do is, at least for the breakout sessions with the team, even if the team is not willing, we at least turn on the video, at least ourselves, and that just makes a better interaction and conversation. Because it's maybe an hour, it may be 2 hours, especially when people are on phone call. How do you get them to engage and they're not doing other things, So that can be challenges. So I would just say, if you're doing PI planning virtually, just utilize the tools, like, whether you're using Teams or all these different tools, there's things available. And even if you can't go and talk to a person right there, you can set up meetings and you can still ping them. So I think a lot of it comes to being proactive and willing to adapt with, the situation.
Yeah, I'm sure that you also need some sort of agreement, right? Like, if a organization is doing PI planning remotely, I'm sure with the teams, or just really with the teams of teams, you have some sort of agreement where, like, hey, I can't casually walk up to you and grab you, but how can I best reach you? How are you going to be available? Is it going to be through Slack? Is it going to be through Teams? Do I call you? I'm sure you guys have some sort of like a spreadsheet with like phone numbers of people and like, how can I reach this person better when I just kind of need them to answer a certain question or whatever.
So you bring up a very good point. So our organization actually use Teams and Teams channels, and we made it very effective. So we have a channel for a Scrum Master. So anytime you have a dependency or something that you're confused about, or their dependency board might be, we can post it in the channel. And each of the teams have their own individual channels as well. So if, my team, let's say Incredibles, has a dependency with vendors, just for a real life example, then, I would go to the vendors channel and say, hey, I have this dependency. We need to have this person might need to get on a discussion. So just using a form of communication where everyone can see.
Right.
And obviously part of that agreement is that people have to be responsive to the channels.
Right.
And otherwise it's not going to work, right? So
you're done with PI planning. There's a lot happens during those 2 days. What do you do after? How do you make it successful? Because planning is just not enough. Obviously, you got to execute.
Yeah.
So going out of PI planning, walking out of PI planning, maybe even let's back up a little bit. The second day, third day, however long your PI plannings are, what do you make sure you walk out of PI planning with?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is some sort of commitment to PI executives, right? And, not, because your plan may change, but your high level goal is not going to change. So making sure you're clear of that. So that's really what you're coming out of PI planning with. And ideally your first sprint is a little bit more refined than the rest.
Right.
Coming out of PI planning, if the team needs, I have additional meetings for sprint 1 refinement before we go into the actual sprint.
Right.
And coming out of that, I think when you're actually executing, the biggest thing I'm going to come back to is transparency, right? Just like PI planning gives you that transparency, I think when you come into the execution phase, you need to have that same transparency.
Yeah.
Because problems are going to come up, challenges are going to come up, right?
Things are
Things are going
going to change.
to change, and you're going to have to pivot. That's part of being agile, right?
Yeah.
Responding to change.
Right.
So I think if you can come in and your weekly sync up, right? Most organizations have daily or bi-weekly, every few days, scrums, where you're meeting with the other scrum masters, maybe even the product owners, right? You have your RTE, you have you have someone from the program, so you can really, if you need to pivot or certain things are happening, I think a lot of times with challenges becomes because Scrum Masters don't know the challenges in the team, or they don't know how to be transparent and ask for help. They see this problem where there is a, because teams don't say, I have an impediment, right? Just like that, how do you find out the challenges the team are running into and be able to highlight it?
Right.
And so I think if you can be transparent on, hey, here's how the team is moving, right? You're actually using the metrics. You're actually seeing if the team is hitting their goal, right? You're actually having these conversations about team maturity. Then I think that's going to help the execution.
Right.
If you can have that alignment continuously as you come out of PI planning.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think sometimes people, if you're new to SAFe and you go and plan for those 2 days, people are like, oh wow, like, isn't it a lot to flush out everything? Isn't it a lot to write user stories for each iteration? And you do get quite a bit of time to break those features into user stories, but it's not that they're more in a granular level. They're not so detailed. I mean, the product owner or business analyst, whoever's part of the team, they'll still come back and they'll write the detailed user story. They'll put the acceptance criteria. So it's not those 2 days you're trying to figure everything out. So you made a good point that you want to have something at least loaded in each of the sprint, but you want to make sure, okay, first sprint, we have a good idea of what we might be doing out of here, and coming back, you want to make sure you have those refinement sessions, those planning sessions, still create that shared understanding before the sprint actually, or the iteration, we should call it iteration, the iteration actually starts.
Yeah, and I think one last thing I want to add as part of the execution is, I think a concept of a sprint goal, is very, very important.
Right.
A sprint goal gets aligned to PI executives, right? So if we have these big objectives that we're trying to hit, maybe we'll miss, we won't be able to hit it in one sprint, right? But can we have a smaller goal that aligns to that? So, at the end of the sprint, you can measure, hey, it's second sprint, halfway through the PI, right? Based on that, have we hit any of our sprint goal? Where are we to our PI executive goals? So I think that's part of, if you know that stuff, then you can have a real conversation. And if your teams are behind or whatever it may be, then you can say, okay, why? Or maybe we're missing a sprint goal, and that's why we're not hitting the PI executives goals. So.
Right. And I should have explained what PI is, what it stands for earlier, but it's really a program increment. So it's a time box event, and usually it's 8 to 12 weeks. and you really plan for the 4 iteration.
Yeah.
And the 5th one is called IP, so don't confuse the PI with the IP.
Yep.
So IP is just the innovation and planning. It's where maybe you talk a little bit about that actually. So what kind of things, because in organizations when teams are so overworked and they're always like work, and there's this 2 weeks where teams are not actually committing to any work.
Yeah.
It's very foreign for organizations. I've seen, when I was in an organization, the first PI planning we had, they made us load the 5th sprint as well.
Yeah.
There was no way of arguing over it. We have to have it. We have so many things going on.
Even though SAFe explicitly wants against it, organizations do it. So,
exactly.
Yeah,
so maybe what are some things that you have the team do during that IP week?
Yeah, so you actually bring up a good example. Right now, our organization that I'm working with doesn't actually have an innovation and planning.
Okay.
And we as the Scrum Masters are actually trying to build a case and present it to leadership to see if we can have some sort of time for that. But I have been in an organization where we do have innovation and planning, and I think it can be very, very valuable because you're just kind of going and going and going, right?
Yeah.
So if you can take time to slow down and stop, it actually can increase productivity and it can over time, right? And the other thing is, it's not that you're sitting around and doing nothing those 2 weeks, right? You're just stopping from the continuous work and maybe you focus on hackathon, right? Give innovation where teams can come together and invent something that might help them move something quicker, right? And so I think that this type of autonomy motivates team members. A lot of companies want to do lunch and learn or some sort of activities. Why? Right? Because we want motivated individuals.
Yeah.
One of the foundation of being successful in an agile environment. So I think that's what innovation and planning allows you to do. And you also have additional time to...
People want to learn something, they can learn.
Yeah, additional time to learn. It also gives additional time for coaches to teach something new. Like maybe we need a refresher on agile principles. Maybe the team is missing out on certain manifestos. Maybe they need a session from an outside vendor on code quality. Maybe you want to increase automation, right? You want to introduce a new tool. It gives that time to do that.
Right.
And then ultimately it gives you more time for PI planning, pre-planning to the PI planning.
Right.
Because if you don't come into, at least my experience is, if you don't come somewhat prepared to PI planning, then you're gonna already be behind. So I would say those are some of the things that usually tend to be part of the innovation and planning. But the big challenge, like you said, is driving that value to leadership, to have that buy-in, to actually do that. Because what stops the organization, let's say you don't complete what you committed to for those 4 sprints, business still needs it done. A lot of times what ends up happening is, okay, look, we're going to use this for buffer work. Which, in some situation, if it's small amount, it's nice to be able to do that, but you don't necessarily want to continue to do that, And so I think even organizations that are doing SAFe and successful or not, I think they struggle with that. Very few companies actually give time for their teams to have that innovation and planning sprint. But I would say that organizations that have, I've been able to see the value. The team happiness is a lot higher, and they're a lot more prepared coming into the actual PI. And they can actually solve a lot of problems the organization is having because a lot of times they're in the front runner of the problems, right? So they know, hey, if I had this would help me solve my problems. But they just don't have the time to slow down and fix that problem. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, in that, you actually brought up a really good point that I think we can talk about and have a little bit of fun with this, is just the knowledge worker part, right? Because there's this concept, obviously in SAFe, or just in Agile, that I really, really like is, or even one of the SAFe principle, unlocking the what is it called? Of the knowledge workers. And a lot of times there's managers and directors and executives and different people. Now they're good at that.
Yes.
Because you're a manager, you're a director, you're certain leadership position, but you're not in the day-to-day, in and out, actually doing the work. You don't know what solutions to come up with.
Yeah.
That's why you have hired all these, engineers, developers who know what they're doing. maybe let's talk a little bit about that. Like, how do you help just organizations kind of do that a little bit? Because if you are a dev manager, maybe you've been a developer before and maybe you have some advice for your developers. That's great. But a lot of times, like, you probably became a manager because you have some leadership skills, or you've been in the company for some time and now you're like a manager, right? So how do you take that out of your workers, out of the developers?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts, right? Developers, I think just giving them the space, and then coaching them, teaching them, right? As a Scrum Master, you're teaching them first, right?
Yeah.
Saying, hey, this is some of the other things that you're not just, hey, I know how to do this particular language anymore, right? Part of Agile is we want a more self-managing, self-organized team, right? So what does that really mean? That the developer cares more than the individual task they're assigned.
Yeah.
They care about what product they're building, right? Where they're going.
Yeah.
They care about the requirements, if it's clear or not. They care about the dependencies. They care about the process as a whole.
Yeah.
Right? So I think if you have someone, you come into an environment where someone's not at that level, I think you have to do individual coaching and team coaching.
Right.
And you also have to do individual teaching and then maybe team level teaching and trainings that you're going to have to continue to do to help them get there.
Yeah.
I think that's what you have to do for developer, and then give them the space to do that.
Right.
Encourage them, right? Maybe you have a role. Hey, once a sprint, we're going to do a rotation, and actually the developer is going to run the daily stand-up. One person.
Right.
So you help them develop these other skill set. So then there's now there's a lot more buy-in to the team. There's a lot more buy-in in what they're doing.
Because they feel valued.
They feel valued. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Second thing is I always like to make sure that the teams are appreciative and you actually have metrics for team happiness.
Right.
Because if you focus on the team happiness, obviously if the team is happy, they're working well together, they're going to deliver more value. No brainer, right? So a lot of times, a lot of companies don't really focus on these metrics, but I think measuring the team happiness from sprint to sprint, right? It allows you to assess if someone's not happy in the team, what reason, right? It allows you to assess that and work with that person.
Right.
And so I think this is a way that you can start to make sure that there's more motivation and more happiness within the team. Now, when it comes to management and leadership, I think it just depends. I've been in those environments where the managers are so command and control, and from a Scrum Master perspective, I felt almost powerless to my ability to make that influence and change. It was a slow progress, right? But I also been in these organizations where we've had success with that, and all the managers are very hands off, and so I think it's about helping them understand, right? The managers have maybe been working in the same environment.
Yeah.
So if you're in a position to coach them, I think you coach that. If you're not, and you're in a scaled agile environment, maybe those are the things you bring to the RTE.
Right.
Those are the things you bring up. Like sometimes it's about having the courage to say, this is not working.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you have to be able to have these hard conversations.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes people shy away from that, but I think that's where a lot of the learning and the transformation happens if we can address these topics.
No, I love that. I love it all. Yeah, thanks.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We'll be sure to come back with more exciting videos on Agile topics.